Grant Ramaley is an official advisor to the Asian Harmonization Working Party, which represents 30 nations on matters related to the development of harmonized guidance for regulating medical devices. Grant, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. And this is a presentation on the ISO 13485-2016 standard. It's going to cover all of the differences between this and the older standard, the 2003 standard. As Laura mentioned, this is a presentation that was prepared by the International Accreditation Forum for a meeting with medical device regulators that were also interested in the same topic. And this just is a little bit of a background here to begin with. The theme of the IF for this particular working group for 1345 is certified once, protecting everywhere. 1345 is a medical device quality management system that's meant to be used by regulators for public health protection. Currently, there's about 29,617 certificates that are deemed credible under the IEC, ISO, or IF accreditation network worldwide. And if you're interested, you can go to the ISO website and look at their surveys, and there's lots of detailed information on it. One of the things that's central to the 1345 quality management system is its focus on risk management. And this is a little bit heavier in the new 1345-2016 standards. You'll see the word risk management threaded throughout some of the clauses. One of the additional interests for a lot of medical device manufacturers is the new medical device regulation that's coming out of Europe. So we're going to touch on a couple of the clauses and articles within the the medical device regulation in Europe, the EU 745. They're very similar to the 746 standards for IVDs for those people who make in vitro diagnostic equipment. But a little bit of history, so this is more of a regulatory type quality management system. A lot of the regulations that we see out and about used by other countries, especially within the United States, adopted earlier versions of 1345. And this includes Part 820 of the Code of Federal Regulation in the United States. And here's a little statement in the preamble of the FDA that mentions 1345 in it. So the FDA QSR was crafted to align with 1345 in about 1997. Back then, the US FDA aligned a lot with the 1345-1996 standard, and you can see a lot of overlaps in the clauses and the naming conventions for the different processes. In 2000 and 2003, the 1345 standard was revised and followed an early version of 9000, a new version. It would be old then. The 2000 version of 9001 became the 2003 version of 1345, and the different process approach kind of threw things out of alignment with the FDA's Part 820, and you can see how that those 20 processes of the old standard have broken closer into the 6 parts, or these 5 main parts here with the US FDA. So we're going to fast forward here to the 2016 standard, and what we're seeing now is a lot more regulations, not just US FDA, that are using 1345, and especially the 2016 version as it becomes a requirement. And some of the regulations that are most aligned with 1345 are the Korean good manufacturing practices and the Japanese as well under their Ministerial Ordinance 169. One of the things you'll notice in the new 1345 standard is a lot more focus on regulatory compliance. So if you're selling into countries in Australia, Canada, or the European Union, 1345 is a lot more relevant. So there's a couple of points that we're going to move in look at the new EU regulation and the new in vitro diagnostic regulation. Some of the sections there, as I mentioned earlier, those will become a requirement in May of 2024. Though the regulation is beginning to go into effect in May 26, 2020, the old regulation or the medical device directive doesn't become completely obsolete until May 2024. So we'll look at that. Some of the main parts of the new medical device regulation are identified in Annex 9 and Article 10 of the new regulation. So if you're interested in selling into Europe and need to comply with their regulation, you'll find use of 1345 is going to be highly relevant in meeting those parts of that regulation. So overall, what we're really looking at as far as the changes to 1345 is more regulatory compliance, more focus on managing risks, and more of what we should have been doing all along, which is complying with the regulations. So what's the difference? What we're going to look at now, we're going to go clause by clause through the sections of the standard. Some people say that the 1345-2016 standard is death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's really a lot of small changes with some significant changes spread throughout. There's fewer big changes, but we'll focus attention on those and a lot of the little ones too as we go through the next sections. So what did change? Right off the bat, in section 4.11, the organization is now required to document the roles of the employees within the quality system. In the new medical device regulation for Europe, there's an Article 11, which also specifies obligations of a representative of the manufacturer. So that's a role that will have to be designated by the manufacturer. So the authorized representative is a role now that needs to be documented in the 1345 quality management system if you're selling to Europe. Again, one of the things that we're looking at, generally speaking, is an application of a more risk-based approach for the processes. And we'll see a little bit more of that. A lot of the focus of risk management is using the 1345 standard with 14971, which is the risk management system for medical devices. This remains true in the new medical device regulation in Europe, and you'll see this in Annex 1 of Section 3, where there's a much greater focus on risk management. It says it shall be understood as a continuous iterative process throughout the entire life cycle of the device. So there's risk management you will be seeing popping up in post-market surveillance and that sort of thing. So that's risk management really through the life cycle of the medical device. Quality management is Section 4. You'll also notice that everything is to be done according to the risk, the proportion of the risk. So if there's a device with a higher risk, you're going to see more controls will be expected to manage the risks related to that device than if it were a lower risk device. So this can especially be seen with some of the quality agreements that you'll be having with suppliers. You'll want to have more control over suppliers that are supplying more critical parts. Section 4 also includes a much more focus on software validation. This is not just with software related to inspection and testing equipment or that sort of thing, but anything used by the quality system. It could be the ERP system or equipment that's used for doing any kind of a test. There's also a new section called the medical device file, and it includes a description of the product, work instructions for manufacturing and testing. It can refer to more than one file. This is not unlike what we referred to sometimes as the European technical file. But that's an entirely new section within the standard. There's also more requirements with regard to the providing security for information that you're holding within your quality management system and keeping confidential health information confidential, especially if you have information related to patients. So if you are holding on to patient information, especially with regard to implants, which is not uncommon, that has to be especially secure within the new 1345 standard. Management responsibility has more input from complaint handling and reporting to regulatory authorities. So management has a responsibility to review these as part of the design input, and that's a new requirement, though those are some things that most regulators have included in their quality management systems, such as the FDA's CAPA system. So there's a lot more focus within the European medical device regulation on vigilance articles, and here's a list of them, in Articles 87 through 90. You'll see reporting of serious incidences, field corrective actions, trend reporting, analysis of serious incidences, and field safety corrective actions. So all of this is part of the analysis and monitoring, analysis, and reporting mechanisms that the manufacturer will have to have. And as you need to meet the regulatory requirements for 1345, if you're selling to Europe, these articles should be integrated into the quality management system if you're selling to Europe. And by that I mean selling medical devices. I know we do have some of our organizations that are not supplying medical devices, but supplying parts and services. So one of the other things we want to look at is the review of output, and this includes regulatory changes. So if there are any requirements that are going into effect, there needs to be a plan to look at the adoption of the new regulations and the new standards, look at the time frames, and have a plan for meeting the deadlines for the new requirements. There's a little bit of talk in the medical device regulation that relates to what's called harmonized standards, which are usually the ISO, IEC standards, and another thing called common specifications. And these will be something that we expect to see later developed by the regulators if there's a specification that they feel is specifically necessary for a medical device safety. So one of the harmonized standards that we also expect to be used, of course, is the 1345 standard, which will take the form of a European norm standard. So we'll have a designation of EN 1345. So any changes in the harmonized standards are something that's going to have to be taken into account by the quality management system and make that transition in a timely manner according to the regulation. Article 10. So resource management, human resources are one of the areas that we're looking at more closely, and there's much more focus on competence. So competence is the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. Before, when we were looking at human resources, there was at first more attention on making sure that training was effective, but the overall goal is much more apparent in the new standard, is that people actually just need to be competent to do the things that they're expected to. Resource management is also is to be done with regard to the risk level of the work that's being done. So if there's some work that's highly critical to the safety of a medical device, it's expected that the training will be a lot better, and the expectations for competency will be proportionate to that risk. This also concerns competencies of the representative for the company on the regulatory affairs. So in this case, you'll see in Article 15, persons responsible for regulatory compliance have to have a diploma or certificate or other evidence of formal qualifications awarded by the completion of a university degree. So we're looking at people having to have higher educations if they're going to act as a role of a regulatory affairs representative for a company. They can, if they have enough experience, that also counts. So more education allows for a little less experience. If you have a lot of experience, you're likely to have more competence. So those are the things that they're really looking for in terms of competence and meeting the new regulation. So there is a requirement, or I should say a provision within the regulation that if companies have 50 or few employees and gross sales of less than 10 million euros within the EU, that you can hire a regulatory professional outside. So it is possible to get your competency from outside the organization if you're a smaller company. Work environment, there's more focus on control of biological and particulate contamination. There's a clause in Annex 9 that refers to that. So 1345 should satisfy that requirement, but basically look at controls for biological and particulate contamination, especially where sterile devices are being made. Planning, you'll see the word plan show up a little bit more in the new 1345 standard. Plan on what is to be documented to support the infrastructure and control of the work environment. Plans should include handling, storage, distribution, and traceability activities specific to the product. So there's just a little bit more planning required throughout the 1345 standard. In the customer-related processes, there's adds user training to ensure specified performance and safe use of the medical device. So reviews user training. This is something new because more devices are requiring that the user be trained on how to use the device. And by that I mean patient users as well. So what's changed here in customer-related processes? More communication with regulatory authorities. So the organization shall communicate with regulatory authorities in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. In most cases, we're looking at post-market activities, vigilance, so reporting when there's a serious incident, of course, that sort of thing. So know what to communicate and when. Under the new EU regulation, there's going to be more requirements to keep what's called the UTMED database up to date as well. But the quality management system shall address the following aspects: handling communication with competent authorities, notified bodies, or other economic operators, customers, and other stakeholders. Those are statements within Article 10.9 of the new regulation. Now we're going to look at the central part of the quality management system, which is in the design and development planning. You'll see a lot more focus on ensuring traceability throughout the design process. And what does that look like is more connection between the documents within the quality system in the design and development phase. So what's expected exactly is, and focus on competence of the personnel doing the audit, not the auditing, competency of the people doing the design and development process. There's also greater focus on usability to prevent use errors. So manufacturers are to be more aware of what kinds of use errors are occurring, look at the risks related to those, and focus on the risk of those use errors. There's a usability standard called 62366, which focus on usability and prevention of use errors, and that should be taken into consideration. Then the design and review records also requires more documentation, more details of who is doing what within the design and development phases. And this includes the identification of the design under review, the participants involved, and the date of the review. Most of the regulatory authorities want to be able to retrace the origins of a problem, and they depend a lot more on the records so that they can do their job. So that's been integrated a lot more into the new 1345 standard. Design and development verification shall document methods, acceptance criteria, and as appropriate statistical techniques with rationale for sample size. We're seeing a lot more interest in the sample sizes that manufacturers choose when they do a verification and validation activity. And so they want to know if there's a need for a larger sample size. You should be able to justify that. And that's something that could be done based on the risk related to the particular aspect of the device that's being verified. And that goes the same with design and development validation. If you have a small population of users that are going to be validating the device, that might not be acceptable in a case where you have a higher risk device. So you want to be able to justify the size of your user group, taking into account the risk of the device itself. So one of the things that they've added in here, and this is something that the US FDA has had all along in their design control regulation, is that design and development validation needs to be done on representative product, not something that's so much of a prototype that it differs significantly from what's being placed on the market. So you can use prototypes, but if you're going to do validation with them, you need to be sure that the prototypes are very close to what's going to be placed on the market. So validation basically just needs realistic models. So another part of the design and development validation is to make sure that when you're doing the validation, if the device is supposed to be connected to something else, perhaps an iPhone, that the device truly does work when it's connected, and that the information that's being provided by the device appears on the device it's connected to and remains accurate. So whatever it is that your device is going to connect to, just make sure that it works and is validated with it connected. Design transfer is something the US FDA has had for quite a while, and now it's been added as a new section in the 1345 2016 standard. And it's just 7.3.8 is design and development transfer. So can you build what you design is really the central focus of it. So from the medical device file, you'll have all your design output, and you want to be able to make sure that it transfers into something that actually works. So design and development changes. Procedures for design change shall determine the effect on existing function, performance, safety, applicable regulatory requirements, intended use. A whole list of things need to be considered when the design change is taking place. And those are detailed in section 7.3.9 of 1345-2016. So a lot more boxes to check when you're doing design changes. And here's a few more, including product and production, risk management, input, output. It's really important to make sure that any changes within the design control process, if there's any impact on the risk management process, those need to be taken into account during the design change. And that's similar to what's required in the EU. So there's a design and development file, section 3.7.3.10. This is a completely new section, and it basically includes records generated to demonstrate conformity to the requirements for the design and development process. The US FDA calls this the design history file, so there's a little bit of an overlap there. For those companies that are already following the quality system regulation, this isn't really new at all, but it is a new requirement for the 1345 standard. Purchasing has a few changes to it, and it says the organization shall establish criteria for the evaluation and selection of suppliers proportionate to risk. So again, what we were talking about earlier, if you have a component that comes in and it's critical to the safety of the device, you do a little bit more effort in regulating that supplier. There's also requirements to plans for monitoring them, recording the monitoring of suppliers, and written agreements. So there's a lot of little changes in the purchasing process that need a lot closer look. It adds up to a fairly significant change to the purchasing process. And all of it, of course, centers around managing risk of the supplier's product, proportionate to the risk of your device that you're placing on the market. So there is really a lot more focus on the supply chain. Some people wonder whether suppliers need to have a 1345 certification or an ISO 9001 certification. Those are all great things to have, but individual risks related to the device are going to be the thing that matter. So if someone is supplying a component that is not particularly critical, screws and that sort of thing, it wouldn't make sense to require them to have a quality management system, even though it might be welcome to do so. You can probably assess those things another way within the quality management system of the manufacturer. So whatever the output is to patient safety and effectiveness, those things that the supplier provides, those are the things, those particular specifications, those are the things that have to be handled by the manufacturer. They don't require that the supplier have a quality management system, but it certainly helps. So control of product and service positions. This, again, we see a little bit more focus on software. So any software used in production has to be validated. So take a look at the section 7.5.1 and make sure that any software that's used in production is validated. There's also, again, more focus on cleanliness of products. It says if a product cannot be cleaned prior to sterilization or if it's used, its cleanliness is of significance in use, there has to be more control of the contamination. Then this is especially true of devices if it's invasive or reusable. So ask yourself if the device cleanliness is significant in use. How significant is it? Does the device is it going to get sterilized and cleaned before it's used or not? That can have an impact on the environment that you're manufacturing facility. Servicing activities. The organization shall analyze records of servicing activities carried out by the organization or its suppliers. And there needs to be much more attention under the 1345 standard where servicing personnel are concerned, because they are part of the complaint handling process. So making sure your servicing personnel are trained to handle complaints and report them to the complaint handling personnel within the organization is critical for the new 1345 standard. So is it a repair? Is it something that's just coming back for routine service? Or is this something that's come back as a malfunction that was unexpected by the people who originally designed the device? Or is the type of failure being experienced by the customer, does it present any kind of risk to health or serious injury or death or that sort of thing? That's instrumental information for the company to have, and the servicing personnel need to be able to provide it when they become aware of it. So what is a complaint anyway? And so this is interesting because the FDA definition under Part 820 has basically been copied and pasted into the new 1345 2016 standard with the addition of this word usability. And I think it's a little strange that the FDA hasn't come around and put use errors and usability in their own definition. But here it is in the 1345 standard. So everyone needs to be taking into account when they get a complaint from someone, if there was a problem related to their confusion in operating the device that led to the issue, those need to be handled as complaints. The European regulation uses the word incident as meaning a malfunction or deterioration in the device or its characteristics and performance, including use errors again. So all throughout the new regulations and standards, we're seeing a lot more focus on use errors. Process validation, a little bit, not a big improvement, a little bit here. Validation processes for production and service provisions. It says the organization shall document procedures for validation of processes, including the approval of changes to the process. There's a little bit more on software validation, and that when it's done, it be taken into account proportionate to risk. So if the software being used by production, process validation is something where 100% inspection or it can't really be done. And so software in this particular case is automatically going to be a little bit more subject to critical analysis when you're going through a software validation process. But lower devices, lower risk simple devices won't need as much software validation as a device that is more complex. Particular requirements for validation for sterilization and sterile barriers. There's a requirement to document procedures for the validation for sterilization and sterile barrier systems. So making sure that they are sterile, and the sterile barriers, of course, need to hold together during that to make that happen. So there's some other particular requirements for validation of sterilization processes. They're in the ISO standards that I've got listed here, the 17607 series, the -1 and that -2. Those are listed in 1345 as references. So more validation of sterile products and their packaging. This is new to the standard. A little bit more focus on identification, and this is something that's developed recently, just within the last few years with the US FDA's unique device identification. So if required by applicable regulatory requirements, the organization shall document a system to assign unique device identification, UDI as we call it. So UDI, where it's a regulatory requirement, needs to be integrated into the identification process for the quality management system to meet 1345. So how much traceability is required by the medical device regulation? That shall define define the scope and the extent of traceability for 1345. And this could include traceability all the way to doctors and patients. So this is especially true for Europe, where under Article 18, there's going to be a requirement for implant cards so that patients will have them to go through airport security and that sort of thing, and be able to provide a way to identify whether a product that's under recall or something like that that's inside them is something that they need to react to. So other areas of preservation of product, the organization shall protect product from alteration. So highlighted here is the word alteration and distributed by. The concerns here, or the additions here, are that devices that are passing through a distributor, there needs to be sufficient control over the device to make sure that the distributors that are passing through aren't altering the device, changing the labeling, and that sort of thing. Preservation of product, designing and constructing, packaging, and shipping containers. Each manufacturer shall ensure that the device's packaging and shipping containers are designed and constructed to protect the device from alteration or damage during customary conditions of processing, storage, handling, distribution. This really hasn't changed substantially. It seems new to the new standard. I don't know exactly why it would be considered new. It's something that's been in the US FDA regulation since 1996. So anyway, focus on protecting devices and its packaging by designing the shipping containers to be sufficient. Control of monitoring and measuring equipment. A little addition here having to do with adjustments. If there are adjustments made, they do need to be recorded now. That's something that wasn't there before. Other things within the control of monitoring and measuring equipment, there needs to be a documented procedure for the validation of applicable computer software used for the monitoring and measuring equipment. Software validation again. There needs to be a procedure for it. Now there can be one general procedure that includes monitoring and measuring equipment in it, but however it's done, it just needs to be documented in a procedure. Feedback is something that, again, has to be provided from wherever it comes from. In this case, they've added from production as well as post-production activities. So monitoring of processes that are used in production to make sure that that data gets back into the feeds as part of the feedback system. And it should provide input to the risk management system. So any of those errors, incorrect mechanical assembly, bad soldering, do they contribute to patient safety issues? Those are the questions that always have to be asked behind every problem that's being looked at in the feedback process. Complaint handling. This is a brand new section of the standard, and it says that there shall be a documented procedure for timely complaint handling in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. So a lot of jurisdictions, regulatory authorities, they do have a time frame for reporting serious injuries or death. That can be up to 2 days. If it's a serious public health threat, in some countries it can be even sooner. But generally speaking, if you have 48 hours, there's a clock. And so that regulation that we're looking at and will determine whether the complaints are handled in a timely manner or not. Reporting of serious incidences and field corrective actions or field safety corrective actions. That's in Article 87 of the new medical device regulations. And it says that serious incidences must be reported within 15 days, and a serious public health threat, which would be a number of deaths would be expected if it weren't handled quickly. Those are, again, to be reported within 48 hours. And you could look at Article 2 definitions in order to be able to apply Article 87 properly. So internal audits, what's changed there? So again, audit of applicable regulatory requirements. If the quality management system doesn't include a reference to the Korean good manufacturing practices and you're selling into Korea, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So 1345 is enforcing that and is looking for the audits that are being done to include those regulatory requirements within the scope of the internal auditing procedures. Oops, excuse me. So audit regulatory criteria and connect it clearly with the CAPA system. And that's the other thing, is making sure that those regulatory requirements are addressed afterwards. Monitoring and measuring processes. So here is a little bit of a change, is that there's when planned results are not achieved, corrective action shall be taken as appropriate. It used to say to ensure conformity of product, but it's really a matter of making sure that the quality management system conforms to regulatory requirements, not just that the product conforms to its requirements. Monitoring and measuring of product, and it says as appropriate, records shall identify the test equipment. So here, this is also a requirement in Annex 9 of the European regulation, where it says appropriate tests and trials which are to be carried out before, during, and after manufacture, the frequency with which they are to take place, and the test equipment to be used, it shall be possible to trace back adequately the calibration of that test equipment. So some people are putting the calibration of the test equipment on the test records, but if there is another way to provide that traceability, that would probably suffice. The traceability of products to the test equipment being used in calibration is something new in the 1345 standard. Control of non-conforming product now requires that documented procedures shall define the controls related to the responsibilities and authorities for the identification, documentation, segregation, evaluation, and disposition of non-conforming product. There's just more requirements within section 8.3.1 for non-conforming product and that procedure. Also included, it adds evaluation shall include a determination of the need for an investigation and notification of external parties responsible for the nonconformity. So really, do we need to investigate further and notify the supplier? Those are considerations for the new requirements and procedure. So again, more chasing down those requirements back to the supply chain from things that we get from the field when we find nonconformities. Control of nonconforming product also needs to record the nature of the nonconformity, subsequent actions taken, including the evaluations, investigations, and rationale for the decisions. And it adds nonconforming product is accepted by concession only if justification is provided. So again, we're seeing the fingerprints of the regulators. They want to see more information on those records. They want to know who is doing what, who is allowing something to be sold when it was originally considered to be non-conforming. Actions in response to non-conforming product taken after delivery must have procedures for implementing and issuing advisory notices. What's an advisory notice? So section 3.1 indicates that it's a notice issued by the organization subsequent to the delivery of the medical device to provide supplementary information or to advise on an action to be taken in the use of a medical device, modification of a medical device. So these aren't necessarily required for when there's a serious incident in the field. It could be that the device maybe people are confused about how it's operated. Maybe there's been some use errors that have caused some issues. So an advisory notice is just a tool that can be used in the process for corrective actions, especially related to non-conforming products. So must keep records of advisory notices. That's another requirement. Rework is a new section. Again, FDA has had this for a while. So for companies that are applying with the quality system regulation, this won't be that new. It adds that after rework, products shall be verified to ensure that it meets the applicable acceptance criteria and the regulatory requirements. And those records, of course, must be maintained. Analysis of data. So more data is to be reviewed. This includes audits and service reports. If data shows that the quality management system isn't suitable, adequate, or effective, the organization shall use this analysis as input for improvement. So just a little bit more data that needs to be reviewed, transferred to the management review process. Improvement, the organization shall identify and implement any changes necessary to ensure and maintain the continued suitability, adequacy, effectiveness of the quality management system, as well as medical device safety and performance. So here, now we're coming back to one of the fundamental reasons we're doing all of this to begin with, is making sure the device is safe and perform as they're supposed to. And what can the quality management system do to help? And this transfers through, again, something we said before, the life cycle. So it adds the use of post-market surveillance. So monitoring the effectiveness of the device, its safety over the course of time. That's essential, of course, to provide for feedback to the quality management system. And this can be done, of course, through field data, looking at how many devices have been placed on the market and complaints that have been reported or serious incidences. Corrective actions, it adds any necessary corrective actions shall be taken without undue delay. Again, same as complaint handling. How much time do you need? Do you have to report it? Does the corrective action require reporting as a serious incident? Don't delay in the reporting of that, of course, and the same time frames pretty much pertain. So 15 days for regulations like that of Europe, which would be if there was a serious health threat, public health threat, then it would be up to 48 hours. Corrective actions is once to verify that the corrective action does not adversely affect the ability to meet applicable regulatory requirements, safety and effective, and performance requirements. So, for example, I'm switching to a plastic screw to manage corrosion. Will it interfere with electrical grounding? All of those types of things need to be looked at carefully to make sure that they don't create a new hazard. And the same thing's true with preventive actions. So a duplication of that. In this case, if you were using a more fire retardant plastic, is it too brittle? Preventive actions and corrective actions requirements are pretty much identical with regard to the changes. Need to take into account the applicable regulatory requirements, safety and effectiveness of the device. So the main takeaways for the 1345-2016 standard, you'll see again, just to touch on the main points, are that a lot more focus on quality management system regulations. They've been integrated into the standard, And the standard itself requires you to pay more attention to the quality management, or system regulations and other regulations. The European regulation actually requires that the quality management system enforce all of the regulatory requirements of the European medical device regulation. So it rather expands the volume of responsibilities. There's also a much stronger complaint handling and reporting, again, driven by regulatory requirements. So regulators can protect the public when there's a public health threat and that sort of thing. Control over suppliers is known to be an area of concern. And so there's a lot more emphasis in the purchasing controls that auditors and quality managers really need to pay attention to. Everything is more risk-based. Lower risk devices aren't going to need as much attention as companies making high-risk devices like defibrillators and that sort of thing. So there's a lot more attention placed on each of these processes where there's a possible risk that can be introduced into the product. And of course, there's some new documented procedures for validating software and for rework. So that's the end of this presentation, and we hope you'd enjoy it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to whoever you can at the Exemplar Global, or if you want to try and reach me, you can. You'll be provided with the contact information that I have through Exemplar. And thank you much.
Thanks, Grant. This ends today's presentation. Have a great day.